Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism, with the goal of giving you information and content that will help you navigate these difficult and challenging relationships and situations. Hopefully you can heal, recover, or just be able to be more informed. So we're back to our proverb series, my favorite, and this is a beautiful proverb we're going to take on today, an African proverb. I don't know if any of you have ever heard this, but it's very beautiful. It's the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. Now, those of you who've been tuning in, you know I love the proverb series. It's just amazing, and it's what's so beautiful is how much this is one that has benefited from all of you. In fact, it was somebody who sent me a whole list of African proverbs on which this was. I had not heard this, and I thought it was just a stunner when I finally read it. So thank you to all of you who are actually participating in generating these proverbs from all over the world. So the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. This is an African proverb. Like I said, I find it particularly stunning and beautiful. And it really could be an homage to everyone and anyone who has ever experienced any form of narcissistic abuse. Now, the meaning of this proverb is pretty clear. The thing or the person that does harm rarely remembers the harm it causes, but the thing that was harmed, or the person that was harmed, carries the scars for a long time. And that right there, my friends, that is narcissistic abuse. In the last 20 to 30 years, and maybe even longer, our understanding of trauma has proliferated quite significantly. The exploration of trauma as a psychological experience really started actually around the time of the World Wars, when the psychological wounds of soldiers and these psychological wounds they carried for years after combat. They were carried long, long after. Their physical wounds were healed long after the battles were over. These soldiers, these veterans, carried psychological changes, scars, and responses. We've also seen similar changes in people that had survived war trauma as civilians, as we also observe in people who are sexual assault survivors. We now know that trauma lingers in our minds, in our bodies, in our souls, long after the event has passed. When we look at trauma or the impact of any kind of harm on a person, we focus on the person who experienced it, what it does to them. One thing that many trauma survivors struggle with is the why. Why me? Why was I the one? In some contexts, why may not feel as unclear. For example, in a person who is a soldier, maybe the why them and why were they hurt, not someone else, certainly there's going to be difficulty around that. But within a combat situation, there was an expectation of some probability of harm and hurt. For a person who experiences assault outside of a combat setting, the why me can often drive long-term rumination. But the why makes even less sense when people are thinking about close relationships. It is damn near impossible to get our heads around the idea that someone who claimed to love someone could actually harm them. The other struggle is that we too often frame relationship abuse as only being physical abuse, and that really does miss a very big part of the boat. When we think about the harms that often stick with people in human relationships, in childhood, in adulthood, it's the psychological abuse, it's the emotional abuse, it's the words that stick with us for a long time afterwards. Words result in scars that often don't disappear. We can play those words back over and over again, and depending on what age we were when we heard those words, and even in adulthood, they can really shape or reshape our identity. This is what happens to the survivors of narcissistic abuse. The years, and sometimes lifetimes, of being invalidated, minimized, devalued, discarded, gaslighted, manipulated. Those psychological axe blows stick with a person, leaving them confused, anxious, and often blaming themselves which is in essence the equivalent of the tree blaming itself for being hit by the axe. So many survivors may years, months, weeks, or even days later talk to the person who said or did terrible things to them and say, or ask them, why did you say that? Why did you do that to me? And just like the proverb says, and most of you who have survived this, you know, the narcissistic person, the abuser, in essence the axe, will most likely deny ever saying it or tell you that you are making it up. And in some cases, if they do somehow remember or are faced with evidence of the event, will still say, I don't remember. This response, the I don't remember of it all, can be a real mix of gaslighting, denial, and manipulation. Or frankly, maybe part related to this proverb, they may literally not remember. Their lack of recollection, not remembering something that was so important to you, or much more likely their denial of any recollection by a narcissistic person. It's a mix. As I said, many times it is denial or gaslighting. They don't want to come clean on a behavior that doesn't leave them looking good. So they just say it didn't happen. But that moment when somebody who hurt you, when somebody who said something that cut so close to the bone for you and that hurt you, the words that or the actions that stayed with you and stuck with you, it is such an automatic response for narcissistic people to say and do what they want in an impulsive manner that oftentimes they don't even register it. It's just being done off the cuff. So the words, these words or things that they've done that have stuck with you for weeks or even years were basically just a passing tantrum for them. And that awareness that their words that stay with you for years, that was just basically their passing impulsive tantrum, that can be a devastating recognition. This can be even more so, obviously, when it was your parent. Their dismissive words often wounded you in a way that shaped your identity and sense of self. To years later have the parent say, I never remember saying that, when it is a day, a conversation you still remember after all of these years, can really feel quite destabilizing and invalidating. The axe forgets. The tree remembers. The impulsivity inherent in narcissism means that people with these personality styles actually often don't remember. Their unwillingness to engage in self-reflective, mindful presence before saying or doing something means that their bad behavior is typically reflexive. They just do and don't think, and as such, they may not remember, though it is just as often gaslighting when they say they don't remember. So it's a coin flip, whether or not it's denial or not remembering, and it doesn't matter, frankly. And when something was so impactful for you, and it didn't even register for them, it means that you often cannot understand why this bad thing or these bad words happened. And in this way, the cycle for self-blame can often persist for survivors of narcissistic abuse. Since the narcissistic folks out there often do not, or say they don't, remember what they said or just deny it altogether, survivors are often left wondering if they remembered anything in their lives correctly, and will often get caught in these spirals of confusion and self-blame. You remembered, and that's what matters. And as this proverb wisely states, the narcissistic person likely will not. And that can feel like an invalidation of your experience. And this is why therapy and trauma-informed therapy are so important for working through these difficult relational situations. The ability of the axe to forget means that they can just go through life as weapons and just cutting stuff down just because that's what they do. They will lash out and invalidate others in the service of their fragile egos. It's just what they do. And all of us, I guess that makes us the trees, we remember. And it hurts. So this proverb, the axe forgets, the tree remembers, is actually one of the more profound ones I've come across. So thank you for sharing them. And I hope this gives you a framework for why sometimes you feel like you're holding on to these things for a long time, but the person who hurts you seems to be able to let it go. Thanks again.